Yeah, fine, okay. So the novel which we have, as I said, started, I told you to focus on the first 3 chapters, as I said, and the last 2 chapters, the first 3 and the last 2 in the novel. And I'm sure it should be clear by now what I really meant. Here, for example, in chapter 3, I said really it's mainly really about the idea how the story develops. We have more characters to meet, for example, or to know, and really this is not very important as such, as a part of the plot and something like that, but really the idea is to know what is the relationship between Merson and the person that he killed. Because remember, at the end of the day, he was sentenced to death because he committed a crime. He killed an Arab boy, an Algerian Arab boy. And here in this chapter or section 3, as you can see here, right, section 3, we have the introduction about this figure, his friend. Here at the beginning, we have a little bit more details to tell us slowly, and I'm sure you can read that, and I think it's very easy to follow. But we see that we meet his friend Raymond, because here I think his name here, as you can see, Raymond. Maybe I'll highlight just here. Here, his friend Raymond, and Raymond was telling him about his problem with his girlfriend, as I said, and because he thought that his to some extent, really, he said, notice here, he told him, for example, here in this part, he was telling him about friend, and the idea really is if you like, in a way, there are some bits and details here and there, but of course, as I said, you can find it yourself when you read this. Now, if you like, here really the idea is that he's telling him about his friend, that he has a problem with his lady, and later on he wanted to punish her and sort of to teach her a lesson and so on. And really the whole idea went really crazy. And as I said, at the end of the day, he committed a crime which really he doesn't need. Notice, as a matter of fact, I rather want to ask your advice about something. It's connected with business. You have knocked about the world a bit, and I dare say you can help me. And then I'll be your pal for life. I never forget anyone who does me a good turn. When I made no comment, he asked me if I'd like us to be pals. I replied that I had no objection. And step by step, he told him about his girlfriend. And, he says this here to him in so many funny ways. In this part, as I said, really, I can't read all this. But as I can see, maybe I can highlight some of this for you, just maybe to pay attention to see. Notice, so I knew there was dirty work going on, and I told her I would have nothing more to do with her. But first, I gave her a good hiding, and I told her some home truth. I said, and so on. He was saying to him details about warning his friend that she was doing something ugly, maybe to him. And in a way, he accused her of really cheating. But again, we are not sure, and maybe she's not doing that. But the question, of course, is, again, as you know, the idea of the impossibility of understanding the exact situation. And he said he wants to teach her a lesson and he wants to punish her, and that's what he said here. Of course, he said, I ain't punished her enough, So this is, of course, the idea for him, that he wants to teach her a lesson. And he did, in a funny way, really. They really dragged her into like a trap, and he really was ugly with her, especially here in this, in the next page. Of course, he said, he gave us some details about what was going on. Really, it's if you like, he tells more and more, but maybe we can't. There's no way that we can sort of accept or not accept the idea. But the question again here is funny and is ridiculous, about the ways in which he wants to punish her for something maybe she has not done completely or clearly has not done. Anyway, he said here, for example, he said he is going to punish her, and he said she's a Moor or an Arab, as you can see. He said an Arab girl. Notice the moment he mentioned the girl's name, I knew she was a Moor. You see, so this is the idea. Again, this is to do maybe to do with racial question, because again, the novel is, as I said, written and located, and the place was in Algeria and in Algiers. And again, I think the question of racism is very, very strongly clear here. And maybe the shock and the real terrible thing is partly to do with this racial issue, maybe. But really, Camus was not talking about racism as such. He was talking more about, the question of, modern time or mid 20th century European or maybe I should say really European mentality about the absurd and about, modern life and the impossibility of understanding what kind of life, we are leading here. So here the two men started talking, and he said, of course, I'm going to help you and I will do that. And of course, this is the end of this chapter. Now, as I said, there are more and more details. Really, I said I will not ask you to worry about all these. But of course, the details, I think, maybe if I give you more and more about what happened. So in the next chapter, this is, of course, what he wanted to give us more details about in the next chapter about his another friend. This is, but it's, I think, it's a secondary character. It's not really important character. Now, in the chapter 5, he goes back to tell us about Raymond, more about Raymond and about his character and about his friend, or about his Arab friend, and of course, again, more and more about Marie. And I think here, if I show you more details about his girlfriend, Marie, and I think, especially here, maybe if I, the absurd, funny character, funny man, really, he's an amazing man. Notice here, Marie, his girlfriend, she really wanted to marry him, and she was nearly asking him so many times, why don't we get married, and he was strange and saying, why should we get married, and all this carry on here about the, again, he used the word futile, a lot of futile thing. Notice here he said, when she was telling him about marriage and changing life and to move on to some places and etc. Notice, Marie came that evening and asked me if I would marry her. I said I didn't mind. If she was keen on it, we would get married. You know, this is funny, really. Amazing thing, you know, a girl asking her man, her friend, you know, to marry me. And he said, well, maybe if you want, I don't mind, you know. And, you know, I said I didn't mind. If she was keen on it, we would get married. You know, again, you know, this is crazy, you know, this is impossible. You know, no girl would do that. Very, very rarely girls do that, you know, ask boys to marry them, you know, in such a way. Notice, then she asked me again if I loved her. I replied much as before, that her question meant nothing or next to nothing. But I supposed I didn't. You know, he's telling us. She asked him, do you love me? You know, and then he said, maybe I did not say anything. But he said, maybe if I wanted to answer, I say, maybe I don't, you know, I didn't love her. And then she said, if that's how you feel, she said, why marry me? I explained that it had no importance really, but if it would give her pleasure, we would get married right away. I pointed out that anyhow, the suggestion came from her. As for me, I would merely say yes. Then she remarked that marriage was a serious matter, to which I answered no. She kept silent after that, staring at me in a curious way. Then she asked, suppose another girl had asked you to marry her, I mean a girl you liked in the same way as you like me, would you have said yes to her too? Naturally. Then she said she wondered if she really loved me or not. Of course, couldn't enlighten her as to that. And after another silence, she murmured something about my being a queer fellow. Yeah, you know, this is the idea, you know, really, he is a stranger, isn't it? You know, she said he's funny, queer man. Ain't I already, and I dare say, that's why I love you, she added. You know, as if to say, you are a strange man and that's why I love you. Well, I don't know. I think this is crazy. I don't know. She added, but maybe that's why one day I will come to hate you. Yes. And funny enough, that's what's going to happen, because later on they asked her to testify against him when he was in the trial, you know. Really, I just wanted to highlight this for you, just to show you, of course, part of his crazy manner, as I said, about his attitude towards marriage and love, and to this young lady who really, she liked him and she loved him and she wanted to marry him, you know. And she was saying, you know, honorably, clearly, nicely, she liked him, etc., etc. And again, he said, all right, you know, all right. I answered, we will get married whenever you like. I then mentioned the proposal made by my employer, and Marie said she would love to go to Paris. You know, so the idea really here, as I said, this is one of his funny attitudes towards marriage, which is, as I said to you, really impossible to really understand in every sense. And I think, you know, this is the important parts maybe to know about the plot. Later on, of course, you know, their relationship went really funny, and he sort of really, in a way, treated her, to some extent, I think, treated her in a bad way, and she never really had anything good with him. Now, in the next chapter, in chapter 6, you know, if you like, to go more about the question of his friend Raymond in this here chapter 6, as you can see. I think, in a way, we have more details about that, and I think some of those details are not really to us at the moment. To us, are not really very, very important. But just as I said, if you have time to read all this just for fun, you will know more details about his life and about this strange character. But again, here, of course, here we have more details about meeting, this man and the Arab boy. Again, notice here, I explained to those Arabs across the way had a grudge against Raymond. She insisted on our going at once. Then Raymond laughed, and so on. So here, the introduction, remember, as I said, Meursault killed unintentionally, or later on, really it was in a bad, funny, horrible, ugly way. He killed the Arab boy, who is the brother of Raymond's girlfriend, Moor Arab girl, whom was supposed to be, in love, or Raymond was supposed to be in love with her and to marry her, and so on. So we find really here very bad things going on here about how women are badly treated here in a way by men, both by Raymond and himself, Meursault, the way Raymond treated his girlfriend and hit her, and he really, punished her terribly, and physically, he punished her and hit her, and he literally, like raped her in an ugly way, and so on. And in the same way, his friend, Raymond's friend, who is of course Meursault, later on, even killed her brother again for no real reason. What did she do? Why would he punish her in this way? And why would Meursault kill her brother? Just for spite, for what? And I think this is the idea here about the question. Really, we understand, here in this chapter, if we like here, notice here the locale where they notice Raymond's friend owned a small. I'm reading just really to show you a little bit, because I want you just to follow a little bit of the plot. Raymond's friend owned a small wooden bungalow at the near end of the beach. Its back rested against the cliffside, while the front here, this is the place, the time at the sea, where the crime, the accident. I think the crime I can say, of course, as really as a crime, really, to kill somebody just really for no real amazing reason here. They were at the sea enjoying the summer supposedly, and doing sort of really relaxing way, and then which was a very shocking twist when you are supposedly to be going to the beach to enjoy life and to enjoy your friends and so on, and then you suddenly turn suddenly quickly to become a criminal. Really here you can see, for example, how the idea may be developed here. I will read some of this quickly to show you, how the whole thing happened. Notice the boys, he said, he met by chance two Arabs, notice here. Just you watch, I ain't finished with him yet. Look out, I cried, he's got a knife. I spoke too late. The man had gashed Raymond's arm and his mouth as well. And he tells here more and more, but let me see, because I have highlighted here in my book first, in my notes, and I think this is really terrible here. He shot him here on notice in these pages, as you can see, he said here on page 37, he said to him, I will shoot. Notice Raymond was, notice, listen, I said to Raymond, you take on the fellow on the right and give me your revolver. If the other one starts making trouble and gets out his knife, I will shoot. And again, really here, notice the sun glinted on Raymond's revolver as he handed it to me, but nobody made a move yet. It was just as if everything had closed in on us, so that we couldn't stare. We could only watch each other, never lowering our eyes. The whole world seemed to have come to a standstill on this little strip of sand between the sunlight and the sea, the twofold silence of the reed and stream. And just then it crossed my mind that one might fire or not fire, and it would come to absolutely the same thing. Notice here really the crazy attitude that he's saying, whether to shoot or not shoot. To him, he's saying it could be the same thing. Then all of a sudden, the Arabs vanished. They had slipped like lizards under cover of the rock. So Raymond and I turned and walked back. He seemed happier and began talking about the bus to catch for our return. When we reached the bungalow, Raymond promptly went up the wooden steps. So again here, we see that we thought that this was the end, but of course, no. It was on the next page, as you can see, page 38, really where the whole thing, notice here in this section, if you like, really all this part is quite important, where the shooting really. Notice, on seeing me, the Arab raised himself a little and his hand went to his pocket. Naturally, I gripped Raymond's revolver in the pocket of my coat. Then the Arab let himself sink back again, but without taking his hand from his pocket. I was some distance off, at least 10 yards, and most of the time I saw him as a blurred dark form wobbling in the haze, in the heat haze. Sometimes, however, I had glimpsed of his eyes glowing between the half-closed lids. The sound of the waves was even lazier, feebler than at noon. And you can see really the way he's narrating how, he killed this Arab boy really in a very sort of terrible, cold-blooded, manner. I could just make out from the corner of an eye the small black moving patch while I kept my gaze fixed on the Arab. It struck me that all I had to do was to turn, walk away and think no more about it. But the whole beach, pulsing with heat, was pressing on my back. I took some steps toward the stream. The Arab didn't move. After all, there was still some distance between us. Perhaps because the shadow on his face, he seemed to be grinning at me. I waited. The heat was beginning to scorch my cheeks. Beads of sweat were gathering in my eyebrows. It was just the same sort of heat as at my mother's funeral, and I had the same disagreeable sensation, especially in my forehead, where all the veins seemed to be bursting through the skin. I couldn't stand it any longer and took another step forward. I knew it was a fool thing to do. I wouldn't get out of the sun by moving on a yard or so. But I took that step, just one step forward, and then the Arab drew his knife and held it up toward me, athwart the sunlight. A shaft of light shot upward from the steel. I felt as if a long, thin blade transfixed my forehead. At the same moment, all the sweat that had accumulated in my eyebrows splashed down on my eyelids, covering them with a warm film of moisture. Beneath a veil of brine and tears, my eyes were blinded. I was conscious only of the symbols of the sun clashing on my skull, and less distinctly of the keen blade of light flashing up from the knife, scaring my eyelashes and out and gouging into my eyeballs. Then everything began to reel before my eyes. A fiery, of course, you can see here really, I will read this at the end of it. Really, it's as you can see, really the whole thing is the moment preparing us to tell us how he shot him here. Notice, flame the sky cracker in two from end to end, and a great sheet of flame poured down through the rift. Every nerve in my body was a steel spring, and my grip closed on the revolver. The trigger gave, and the smooth underbelly of the butt jumped my palm, and so with a crisp whip crack sound it all began. I shook off my sweat and the clinging foil of light. I knew I had shattered the balance of the day, the spacious calm, this beach on which I had been happy. But I fired 4 shots. I fired 4 shots more into the inert body on which they left no visible trace. And each successive shot was another loud, fateful rap on the door of my undoing. What? Why would you shoot somebody 4 times? 4 shots? Well, you know, really, this is the ugly thing here. As you can see, he's talking a lot about the psychology about it, the sun and the heat and the memory of his mother and the ugly thing that he's always associating with the heat and the sensation. And as you can see, he said as if he couldn't understand, he couldn't believe. And, you know, he highlighted the idea of the heat, you know, and the really, if you like, the unconsciousness or the subconsciousness of things, how he thought that he was killing him in defense, in self-defense, because he thought that the Arab boy drew his knife to hit him or to, you know, stab him with a knife. But of course, there's a difference between a knife and a revolver, you know, a gun. So he shot him 4 times and he killed him. And he had no idea that this Arab boy was not attacking him. He was coming towards him. And the Arab boy was really careless. You know, I'm not saying this because he's an Arab or anything. No, no. But the idea really is, again, you can see here, he said that Arab didn't move. You know, he didn't move. So there's no sign of the Arab trying to attack him or jump at him or something. The Arab boy was not really, you know, showing any danger, you know. So that's the idea here. Really, we feel that this is really unbelievably wrong to have done that. Really, this is the idea. Just excuse me for a second, please. Okay, sorry. Let me go back to, yeah. So I'm just really showing this just to, as I said, to show you or to put you into the scene of the crime. You know, why this crime had happened. You know, this is really meaningless, crazy, absurd crime, which is really for no reason. Why did he do that? Why did this, you know, ever happen? You know, really, this is the question here. And I think the novel is really drawing a lot on that to say that this accident, well, really, it's not an accident as such, but it looks like being an accident. Um, um, so the idea here is quite amazing, and maybe we can say suitable to the question of the absurd, because the whole idea of doing this was strange, unbelievable, not needed in any way. So that's why, of course, at the end, when after that he was taken to, of course, to prison and to be trialed, and this is, of course, what happened in part 2 of the novel, as you can see. And as I told you, really there are a lot of details here. Again, I will check. You know, many times we see the police, when the way they were asking him so many questions, and the weird things about how, of course, when he did this, he was taken by the police and to prison, and they started really questioning him why you did that. And he said they started to ask him really funny questions, and to him really funny questions. He said, you know, if you like, he was again trying to you know, to say, why did I do that? You know, notice here, for example, notice after another silence, he stood up and said he'd like to help me. I interested him, and with God's help, he would do something for me in my trouble. But first, he must put a few more questions. You know, of course, this is one of the you know, investigators, or one of those policemen, or even like maybe like attorney, or like a lawyer who wanted to help him. And he said he began asking bluntly if I had loved my mother. You know, this is to him again. Here we start to have really funny questions. What's this to do with, you know, killing? What is it to do with his mother, whether he loved his mother or not? Yes, I replied, like everybody else. The clerk behind me, who had been typing away at a steady pace, must just then have hit the wrong keys, as I heard him pushing the carrier back and crossing something out. Next, without an apparent logical connection, the magistrate sprang another question. Why did you fire 5 shots? Again, you know, asking him all this. I thought for a bit, then I explained that they were not quite consecutive. I fired 1 at first and the other 4 after a short interval. You know, why did you pause between the first and the second shot? You see, again, even those to him, he's saying, what questions are these? Again and again he said, but why did you go on firing at a prostrate man? Meaning somebody who already, you know, dead. Why did you go on and shooting him? You know, of course, again, sorry, I just wanted to, you know, just to highlight some of those to, again, see the meaning of the absurd more and more about that. Notice, I asked why. I insist on telling me. I still kept silent. Suddenly he rose, walked to the file cabinet again. Do you know who this is? His voice had changed again. Of course I do. And so on. Really, there are a lot of details. As I said, as you know, read everything. As I told you, this is not included. He said, of course, I think one of the idea, notice, that was unthinkable. Yeah. Again, notice, asking him, do you believe in God? Notice, asking me very earnestly if I believed in God. Again, you know, this is really terrible thing about, you know, the absurd people here. Mostly we know that they are, most of them really, of course, we know that they are non-believers. They are really terrible atheists in so many ways. So really, this is the idea here. He's very surprised that he heard this question, do you believe in God? That was unthinkable, he said. All men believe in God, even those who reject him. Of this he was absolutely sure. If ever he came to doubt it, his life would lose all meaning. Do you wish, he asked indignantly, do you wish my life to have no meaning? Really, I couldn't see how my wishes came into it. And I told him so, and I told him as much. You know, again here, the question about God, again, is related to the meaning of the absurd, because these people don't believe in God or anything. They are terrible atheists. Notice he said, well, while I was talking, he thrust the crucifix again just under my nose and shouted, anyhow, I am a Christian, and I pray him to forgive you for your sins. My poor young man, how can you not believe that he suffered for your sake? You know, here really he means they mean Christ. Of course, for us really, you know, in the Christian sense, this is acceptable, but for us as Muslims, I think most of us, you know, sometimes we find this really very weird and very strange. Anyway, that's not our question here. The idea of belief and not belief, you know, again, is quite interesting. And really, I would like to highlight here something. It's exactly, in a way, you know, it reminded me really of Raskolnikov in the same way here. For some moments, there was a silence during which the typewriter, which had been clicking away all the time we talked, caught up with the last remark. Then he looked at me intently and rather sadly. Never in all my experience have I known a soul so case-hardened as yours, he said. All the criminals who have come before me until now wept when they saw this symbol of our Lord's sufferings. You know, this is exactly Raskolnikov. Raskolnikov was never a believer. Raskolnikov in Crime and Punishment was never a believer. He only turned to be a Christian through Sonia. Sonia gave him the Bible, when he went to prison after admitting the crime and was sent to prison, he was given the Bible and he started to become Christian through Sonia. And this is really the irony and the funny, really, absolute paradox, if you like. I was on the point of replying, that was precisely because they were criminals. As if to say, I was not, or I am not a criminal. He said, the criminals, yes, they cry, but I am not a criminal. So this is it. We ask the same thing. We say the same thing here. Is he really a criminal? Is really Yerma a criminal? Is really Raskolnikov a criminal? Again, you see here the question. He said, criminals, yes, they cry. Criminals, yes, they weep in front of you. But for me, he said, I'm not a criminal. Therefore, I will not cry. Notice, I was on the point of replying. That was precisely because they were criminals. But then I realized I too came under the description. Somehow it was an idea to which I never could get reconciled. Really, this is exactly Raskolnikov, like exactly Yerma. Yerma would never think of herself as being a criminal who killed a man. Even Raskolnikov was totally a believer that he killed Alyona because she is a louse, as he said. She is an ugly thing. She is a terrible thing. He really believed that it was not a crime. To indicate, presumably, that the interview was over, the magistrate stood up in the same weary way, and he asked me a last question. Did I regret what I had done? Again, this is a Raskolnikov question and a Yerma question. Did you really regret what you have done? And thinking about it, after thinking a bit, I said that what I felt was less regret than a kind of vexation. Not really regret, but I was angry. Notice, I could not find a better word for it, but he didn't seem to understand. This was as far as things went at that day's interview. Yeah. Really, Yarma killed her man because she was absolutely angry. Yeah, it was vexation. Absolute vexation. She was terribly irritated, terribly driven to madness. And again, we can say that maybe Raskolnikov was driven into this through the terrible, really, ways in which he found himself as the Superman who wants to cleanse society from horrible creatures like her, Alyona Ivanovna. The only regret that he felt, that he regretted killing her sister, Elizaveta. Really, the only one he regretted is killing her sister. So this is again, as I said, absolutely, Raskolnikov here. And here he goes on to talk. Remember, the whole novel is narrated by him, Merson himself. The magistrate, I'll read this again to you. The magistrate seemed to have lost interest in me and to have come to some sort of the decision about my case. He never mentioned God again or displayed any of the religious favor I had found so embarrassing at our first interview. The result was that our relations became more cordial. After a few questions followed by an exchange of remarks, which the lawyer and the magistrate closed the interview. My case was taking its course, as he puts it, or as he put it. And, really, this is, I think, an important part of the novel that you should know something about it. And I think here at the end of this chapter, I think there's a lovely passage. I think, notice, neither of the two men at these times showed the least hostility toward me, and everything went so smoothly, so amiably, that I had an absurd impression. Used it now here, of course, an absurd impression of being one of the family. What? One of the family? He's in prison, and these are the policemen, interrogating him. And he said they become friendly, like being in a family. I can honestly say that during the 11 months these examinations lasted, I got so used to them that I was almost surprised at having ever enjoyed anything better than those rare moments when the magistrate, after escorting me to the door of the office, would pat my shoulder and say in a friendly tone, "Well, Mr. Anarchist," sorry, Mr. Antichrist. "Well, Mr. Antichrist, that's all for the present." After which I was made over to my jailers. It's funny, isn't it? I'm saying here really it's funny, but it's really, this is, of course, to us, what we call really the unbelievable, the meaninglessness. And he said, "This is the best moments in my life," he said. What? I can't believe it. What kind of man is this? Isn't it? He said, "This is the best," he said. The rare moments, the happiest, the most enjoyed thing that he had ever had, he said. For all these months of interrogation, of examination, he said, I was very happy when they called me Mr. Antichrist. I think he's mad. I think he's sick and he's mad. Anyway, that's the meaning of the novel, really, of the impossibility of understanding that. And as I told you, really, in the last two bits, of course, all this section, the whole thing was he was in prison, and step by step, he was waiting for the final moment of his trial. Of course, when they sent him to, of course, the execution. In this section here, we have more people to testify against him, and they asked Marie. Of course, he thought that Marie and everybody will be on his side, and here you can see, of course, notice on my side the rails were about a dozen other prisoners, Arabs for the most part. On Marie's side were most Moorish women. She was wedged between a small old woman, and so here he gives us more examples of the reaction about his time in the prison when Marie, his supposed to be future wife or his girlfriend, to whom he said he would marry her if she wanted, So really, at the end of the day, she testified against him because, she said that he really never, she testified the truth, of course. That's the idea. I don't know, maybe if I have, I would highlight for you maybe one or two here, maybe in yeah. notice, it's all right, it all come right, you see, and then we shall get married. All I could see of her now was the white flash of her teeth and the little puckers round her eyes. I answered, do you really think so? But chiefly because I felt it up to me. I felt it up to me to answer something. She started talking very fast in the same high-pitched voice. Yes, you will be acquitted. We will go bathing again Sundays. You know, here, as I said, as you can see from really, Marie visited him as a good friend. Really, she loved him. Maybe she wanted to marry him, and so on. And we see, of course, her absolute honesty, and you know, really, in a sense, her simplicity and even being naive, really, in so many ways. In this section, of course, notice. My turn came next. Marie threw me a kiss. I looked back as I walked away. She hadn't moved. Her face was still pressed on the rails. Her lips still parted in that tense, twisted smile. And I think that was maybe the last time he will see her, because after that, she, as I can see later on, she testified against him, of course. Notice here again, maybe I will read some of this for you, because I think it will explain later his crazy attitude. Yeah. Here also he was talking, you know, picking the question about liberty and about freedom and all this carry on. You know, if you like, notice here he said that about the question of freedom and liberty. Notice, liberty, he said, means that you have being deprived of your liberty, you know, being in prison, of course. It had never before struck me in that light, but I saw this point, his point. That's true, I said, otherwise it would be a punishment. The jailer nodded. Yes, you are different. You can use your brains. The others can't. Still, those fellows find a way out. They do it by themselves. And, you know, he goes on and on. I think I want to jump to the last most important chapters, because here really there are a lot of details. I'm looking into my book, because I want to really quickly now in chapter 3, I said, let me see, we said the chapters, yeah, just a second, because I want to double check the last two chapters. Chapter 5 and chapter 4. Where is the beginning of chapter 4? Sorry, girls and boys. Yeah. Now, as you can see, more details in chapter 3 here. There are a lot of details, and as I said, really, I'm not going to read any of this. But here you can see more details about people testifying against him, and they brought the question of, you know, his attitudes towards everything. Yeah, let me. Yeah, really, they are not. They are important in a way for some details, but yeah. For example, on page here, let me see. I found one bit which is again was strange. They asked him about his behavior the next day of the funeral. Yeah, here on here, gentlemen of the jury, I would have you note. This is the magistrate speaking, asking about, gentlemen of the jury, I would have you note that on the next day after his mother's funeral, that man was visiting in the swimming pool, starting a liaison with a girl, and going to see a comic film. That's all I wish to say. As if to say, this is a very strange man doing all this. And remember, this is a court, and they are trying him, and they are trying to see whether he was, to blame. And I think here, of course, you can see more testimonies of other people from Raymond here. And again, we see more of the others. Notice what he said. Not only did the man before you in the dock indulge in the most shameful orgies on the day following his mother's death, he killed a man cold-bloodedly in pursuance of some sordid vendetta in the underworld of prostitutes and pimps. That gentleman of the jury is the type of man the prisoner is. Well, yeah, I mean, to be honest, I think that's a fair judgment, because yeah, that's what Meursault really is. He was exactly that. So we can see here a question, of course, which is really very important and valid here. And they wanted really to say here, notice, they hung together psychologically, if he might put it. In short, he concluded, speaking with great vehemence, I accuse the prisoner of behaving at his mother's funeral in a way that showed he was already a criminal at heart. Yeah. You see? Again, here asking or talking about the psychology here. Psychologically, to think about it, here we have a man who is ugly. Again, he said, I accuse the prisoner of behaving at his mother's funeral in a way that showed he was already criminal at heart. These words seem to take much effect on the jury and public. My lawyer meanly shrugged his shoulders and wiped the sweat from his forehead. But obviously he was rattled, and I had feeling things weren't going well for me. Yeah, so later on, as we know that this is, of course, what happened. He said how they really at the end of this, he felt the whole thing really was terrible, and as if he was noticed. The shouts of newspaper boys had already languid the last call of birds in the public garden, the cries of sandwich vendors, the screech of street cars at the street corners of the upper town. That faint rustling overhead, the darkness sifted down upon the harbor. All these sounds made my return to prison like a blind man's journey along a route whose every inch he knows by heart. Yet this was the evening hour when, again, of course, he said, I always felt so well content with life. Then what awaited me was a night of easy, dreamless sleep. Can you believe it? How can you sleep with no dreams, as if you are absolutely relaxed? This was the same hour, but with a difference. I was returning to a cell, and what awaited me was a night haunted by forebodings of the coming day. And so I learned that familiar path traced in the dusk of summer evenings may lead as well to prisons as to innocent, untroubled sleep. Really, this is unbelievable here again. The next, as I said here, please read this, because these two chapters are more psychological, more really important, if you like, about the whole idea of really the novel. Please, the last pages, the last 10 pages, please, well, yeah, maybe last 15 pages. Please read them carefully, and I will, next time, I thought this would be my last lecture, but maybe I will give you another lecture, a final concluding lecture, and some questions if you want. And that's it for today, ladies and gentlemen. If you really need any question, you are welcome.